Hey everybody, welcome back to the Guitar Ed podcast. This is episode number 144. My name is David Beebe, one of your co-hosts for this evening, and joining me on this episode is Tom Quayle.
Hello.
Dan Smith.
Hello.
And Dr. Jake Wilson.
Hello.
Team, it's good to have the four of us back. We've been a few where we've been dispersed throughout the
Guitarniverse.
The universe.
How you all doing?
Yeah, not bad, thank you.
Yeah, that's some quick catch-ups. Tom, you're converting your garage.
Yeah, I'm converting my garage. My studio's too small. It's been funny, actually. People have been asking me since this recent spate of YouTube videos to do a studio tour, and it's like, I could literally sit on my chair and spin about 30 degrees from left to right with a camera, and you would have the entire studio tour, because behind me is just the racing sim setup, and that's it. There's nothing in here. Well, there is. In fact, that's totally false. There's a shed load of stuff in here.
It's an Aladdin's cave of guitar gear.
Yeah, and also my partner, Cheryl, is going full-time in her cake-making business. I should do an advert here. But
full cake.
Yeah.
It'd be pointless because our audience is worldwide and she's very local. Obviously, we're not shipping cakes to Singapore or wherever. She's going full-time, so we need the space in the house. And so I've been converting the garage. And we've taken step one because part of the thing is figuring out how much to do in order to get to the point I need to be, as opposed to having this temptation to literally make it into the best, most soundproofed garage conversion ever, and then become in serious debt. So we built a wall over the garage door today, over the last 2 days. Myself and Dave Bronze, all the guys will know who Dave is, I would imagine. And we've built this wall. It's pretty cool, actually. It's good stuff, and we've insulated it all. And the next step is to put the floor in, and then put some walls, some false walls up and a false ceiling up. And then hopefully that will be it. And then I can get in there, and then I'll do a studio tour, because it's going to be big enough to do it. Can't wait.
You need one of those estate agent kind of lenses.
Yeah, like a 3mm fisheye lens that makes everything look huge.
Make a shower cubicle look like a hall.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have access to one of those, so I'm not going to do a studio tour until we're in the garage.
Smith, Jake, you good episode last week with Pliny. Really enjoyed editing and doing that one. And
yes,
thanks for stepping in. As I think I mentioned at the beginning of the show, like there was some logistical crossed wires between all of us, and including my lovely wife as well. So I couldn't be there to.
There's that dude that's like, there's that guy that's like the fifth Beatle or whatever. Is that what's the producer?
George Martin.
He's like the fifth Beatle. Is Sarah like the kind of the fifth?
No, it's very simple. He locked her in the kitchen again.
The kitchen incident. No, I enjoyed that. The plinth of view. It was a good time. It was his camera angle from his mannerisms and his camera angle that he had at the time felt like me and Jake were on like a bit of a date with some sort of dreamy Australian.
Oh wow.
Because he sort of sits, does this stuff with his hands, like while he's sat there talking, and I assume he was having a nice time. And it's kind of like, he's got all the body language is there. We're in, Jake, we're in.
I was disappointed you didn't call it a plinterview. I have to say that would have been good, but never mind.
Yeah, has that just come to you now, Dan?
It did, yeah. Because I was talking before, and I was like, Plinstagram. It could have,
Plinstagram, plinterview. Yeah. Plantastic.
Wilson, how are you doing?
I'm not too bad. I've been mainly trying to write this tune, and I spoke to you guys on the Slack about it. Basically, it's another classic. Write 5 minutes of music, and then decide that basically everything after the first 2 minutes doesn't really work or fit. So bin it and start again.
This is incredibly familiar to me.
But I did start again today, and I think I started to work out why it wasn't working. And sometimes when you're writing stuff, you just want to write something on some day, and you go to write that thing, and you realize it just doesn't work with that material. But you wanted to write that thing, so you did it. But hopefully, maybe it will kind of turn into more than one tune, and nothing will get wasted, because some of it was all right, but it was one of those things. It's what it is. So I've been trying to write more in. I'm putting like November aside to put a real dent in the next project. So I'm kind of looking forward to it, but it's also that thing of you get a bit excited and a bit impatient when it's going really well, but if it's not going great, it's hard to get the energy together sometimes. But apart from that, back in lockdown, enjoyed our chat with the Plinster. That was good fun. And I think the thing now is that I've got it in my head that I need to make some sort of pun of PLIN and then something else. Maybe we'll crack one out during the show. We'll see.
No Plinstant puns.
Just as soon as it comes to you, just fire it off, regardless of what we're talking about or who you're interrupting.
yeah, sorry guys, you're just coming in with this one.
Just say it Plinstantly.
Oh, damn it.
Awesome. Well, let's do some housekeeping and then we'll get into today's episode. So thanks to everyone for listening to the podcast, supporting us and spreading the love, especially to those of you on Patreon. We don't have anyone new to mention this week. We've just done it on the last bonus episode and the Pliny episode. But yeah, thank you for listening. If you do like the show and enjoy what we do, then from just $1 a week, it'll get you longer episodes, full-length interviews, additional Patreon monthly bonus episodes, and the Executive Producer Plus level, you get the video live streams where we hang out with guitars and do some fun guitar stuff. Other ways you can support is to check out our t-shirts over on TeeSpring, leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Instagram. There's some cool things happening with our social media in the next few weeks, so keep an eye there. Dan's doing a killer job with the old gram. Send us an email into hello@theguitarhourpodcast.com and join in the discussion, the Facebook discussion group. Let's moving along. So in the last bonus episode, we stumbled across the subject of muscle memory. Dan was talking about, were you talking about preparing for your Corona gig at that point?
Yeah, it was a bit of both. It was so I had a gig. What days?
You hadn't done it yet, though, have you?
No,
this is the first episode since you've done it, because that's what we're going to talk about. Was
yes, this was like the debrief, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, why don't you talk about that first, and then we'll get into this sort of follow-up on muscle memory. So how did it go?
So today is Sunday, so it would have been last Sunday.
Yeah, a week ago today.
Yeah. So I was kind of assuming that it just, wouldn't go ahead. So I was like, well, I don't need to check in yet because it's probably not going to happen. And then it was a theatre gig, and it was supposed to be, I think 250 seats is like full capacity, but their max, given the social distancing rules, was about 90, I think. And even that is kind of subject to change because they have to, it's like battleships. They have to like put 4 people there if they're in that bubble, and then you've got to kind of like stick some people in another place. And if people book on their own, then they've kind of got to measure it off, I guess, between seats. Everyone in the audience had masks on. There was the best part about the gig was there was an old lady that had come to the gig on her own, and she had one of those, like, the visors that kind of go around your head and then it comes down like a sort of welding mask kind of vibe. Well, she'd sort of knitted this sort of custom bit that went on the top. And I was like, that is so good. I was like, just because it's like, for one, she's come to a gig on her own, which is like, mad respect for the kind of people that go to the cinema on their own and like, yeah, I'm fucking, going to go and do this thing for myself. But the fact that she'd customized this thing, like an older age, like, I don't know, I just found it really, really interesting. It's like a sort of old lady version of one of those things that you have on the back of your phone so you don't drop it.
Were you all wearing masks in the band then?
We had to when we were setting up, but we didn't to play. Because obviously you can't, things like saxophone and clarinet would be rather difficult with a mask on. I said they should just put masks on and then have like lipstick on the outside. But no, yeah. So we didn't have masks on when we were playing. Usually the band will do things like swapping microphones. Like the two girls, there's certain tunes where one is playing piano and the other one's playing violin and singing, and then there's another one where the violinist is playing piano, and then the other girl is playing sax and just singing. So it's like kind of they'd normally have changed microphones, but they actually moved the mics this time to be seen to be COVID safe, if you like.
They took their own mics over to.
Yeah. We didn't use anything of the theatres. It's just all band gear. But so last time when I mentioned it, I was relearning the tunes that I haven't played for about 7 months, which was super interesting. I won't massively go over it because we did it in the bonus episode, but that stage was very interesting because obviously these songs that you play all the time, you don't really think about them. They don't occupy whichever part of your brain is needed to kind of work through things. When you play them on stage, they're just sort of there. Like your hands just go where they need to be. You just sort of know it. You're not really thinking very much. So having to relearn them was very interesting. It was amazing how much had kind of got lost. There were certain elements, like I could remember what keys tunes are in, and I can kind of remember how they start, but things like bridges or little sections or little set pieces had kind of disappeared. And on the gig, things like on the gig it was fine because I'd gone through everything, but my level of improvisation was quite a lot, well, I'd say quite a lot lower. It wasn't as comfortable as it was sort of back when I was gigging all the time. And it's not that, I was thinking about this before actually, it's not that I just can't improvise anymore. It's that the style of music that it is, doing the swing thing, is that my brain sits in a weird kind of chasm between improvisation and trying to be kind of vocab legit, sort of savvy. So there's sort of certain bits of vocab or certain little things that had potentially slipped. So you're kind of like trying to improvise with what you know the chords are, but some of the sort of vocab had potentially slipped a little bit. Because again, that's kind of, in a way, that's slipping into the muscle memory thing again, isn't it? Because it's little transitions or little licks or little ideas that were sort of quite accessible a while back. Because they're accessible, it means you can vary them and you can improvise around them. But when the initial idea is a bit like that kind of vocab thing gets slightly lost, like, oh, I haven't played this kind of stuff for a while, all that sort of improvisational stuff that's stacked on top kind of falls down a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it went well though overall? Did you enjoy it? Was it a good thing?
It did go well. It felt really strange just because obviously the vibe in the room was a bit odd.
Yeah.
Everyone in masks, and initially people didn't really want to, you know, I think people were unsure about whether they could clap or cheer or make any noise or, you know, even sing along or whatever. That was a bit.
And I presume they sat down. They sat down the entire time.
Yeah. You could kind of like hear them sort of warm up, almost like sonically warm up as the night went on. And Pete usually does this sort of Minnie the Moocher thing where he sort of goes out into the audience. I can't remember if he did that. I don't think he did. I think he sort of he's you know, usually goes out and does something
and
a bit
coughs on
sort of
everybody.
stupid or whatever, like call and response kind of thing. But I think he went backstage and did something like visually funny, like he didn't actually go out into the audience.
Lick the toilet seat.
Oh, baby. It's really interesting at the moment, though, isn't it? I mean, this kind of relates back to the muscle memory thing. I actually re-listened to the episode again before we did this because I listened to it when it was released in October, but it kind of, I'd forgotten some of it. But
You've done some homework for this episode, Tom. This is
well, I needed to, didn't I? Because I wasn't on it. It was another one that I wasn't on, and I had, as I say, I had listened to it, but I thought it'd be good to have it fresh in my mind.
Tom Quayle, fan of the show.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder, I often have thought that from my own personal perspective that all the guys I see who are literally at the top of their game, the best at what they do, are guys who gig all the time. And so that pathway, if we take the improvisation world, that route to the most expressive and best version of what they can be is where the muscle memory is totally in place, but also the ability to manipulate the vocabulary and the harmonic material is also totally in place, where like the access to it is instantaneous. So there's no barrier there. What on earth was that? Did anyone else hear that?
it's the lightsaber.
Oh yes,
Surely
I
everyone-
always
even-
ask this.
Even the listeners must know my lightsaber beer bottler opening by now.
Sorry, it sounded like a cat outside, and I just assume at your place it must be a cat. Yeah, so I'm wondering whether there's like a whole swathe of incredible musicians who are currently going through the worst playing of the last 20 years that they've ever done. And the level will still be really high, of course. If you sat in a room and jammed with them, they would still be really high. But because I think you become, this is a cliche in the highest sense, you learn to be the best musician you can be on the bandstand. And it kind of annoys me because, and I think it annoys me because I don't get to do that very much, just because that's the path I've chosen. But I think it annoys me because it's true. And I know it's true. So I know that I would be the best version of myself as a guitar player and as a musician if I gigged all the time, because I've seen it with other people where they've become exponentially better and better and better. And actually, referring back to you, Dan, where I've seen this happen a great deal when I was younger was on cruise ships, where guys went away on cruise ships and they'd never gigged so much in their entire life. They were gigging for hours and hours and hours every single night. And I remember a particular friend of mine who went away being an okay guitar player and musician, came back from a cruise ship and he was like, oh my God, this guy now is absolutely killer. So something must have happened on that whole thing of gigging constantly and basically removing any barriers to expression and ability to say what you're going to say on the instrument. So harmony is no longer an issue. Time is no longer an issue. Muscle memory is no longer an issue. Your ability to think through changes is no longer an issue. All of those things disappear because you're doing it every night, just like we're having a conversation now. And I wonder, Dan, whether you've experienced this, because you gig more, like BB, you gig a lot, and obviously Jake, you do the theatre thing. Have you guys all experienced that do you feel your playing has taken a step backwards in relation to not necessarily the things that you know and the things that you think you're capable of, but the actual, there's
a general musicianship
the fundamentals
sort of thing.
that just make you sound really good on a gig that you don't have to think about?
Possibly. I think I find there's always an interesting, like as a graph of maybe you could plot about how long away from the band or from a gig I've been, that might give some fire or some enthusiasm or some punch when I come back to it, versus being away too long where it would then tail off into being just a train wreck. So sometimes, for example, I've been away on holiday without a guitar for a fortnight, very little playing. Maybe the week before, the week after, there wasn't a gig. So maybe I might have gone a month without doing a gig. And I sometimes find in those instances, I come back and I'm like, there's this fire, and because I've missed it so much. And it's just been short enough that it hasn't atrophied to the point where I'm not going to be able to do it. And then those instances can be amazing. It's like, a little bit of time away, you come back and you've got all that enthusiasm and punch for it. But I don't think I've ever been in this situation where I've got to the point where it's really atrophied. And it must be now. It must be rough. Certain things in the sense of that style of music. Now, what the type of music I'm talking about here is the sort of function canon.
I'm just wondering, sort of related to that, if you play with let's say you're really at the top of your game, or even multiple rungs lower, but you get to play with a killer drummer every single, like 3 times a week, a really killer drummer who is basically by proxy making your time feel super killer. If you haven't got to play with that guy for, what are we now, 8-9 months in, because there's no gigs and you're not, you can't even hook up and play. Is that then, let's say the next best thing is you're playing with a metronome or you're playing with a drum machine, because you can't play with a real drummer. That has to be having some effect on your long-term time feel. Now, not necessarily to the point where if you got back with that drummer, it wouldn't come back again. But in the here and now, playing on the internet, which is what everybody's doing at the moment, has that 8 months in, it's a long time, affected a great number of really amazing guitar players and bass players' time feel.
It's a big old experiment, I think, isn't it?
And I think it's a travesty that the chief scientific advisor hasn't factored this into the lockdown plan.
I think you'll find there's been 4,000 guitar players who've had really bad time feel since this started. I shouldn't go down that road.
Add that to the stats.
Just to pay out
you
all
got to
those.
laugh, haven't you? You got to laugh. If you don't laugh, what have you got? You got
Exactly.
nothing.
So maybe let's do my favourite subject and defining the terms. What do we mean? I mean, what are the different things that we can mean when we're talking about muscle memory? And does anyone have any strong opening statements about what they feel muscle memory is or isn't?
Yeah,
I think it's recall, right? It's got to be.
I would say so, but I think the experience of it is worth discussing. This kind of
Maybe we should say what our individual experiences of it are.
Yeah, or what we feel like it is. Maybe start with Tom because he wasn't on that episode.
Right.
So maybe if Tom, that might be a good way to do it. So what do you think it is? How do you see it?
Yeah, a good way for me to describe it is that muscle memory is the exact definition for me is that I could hold a conversation with somebody about something completely unrelated whilst doing the thing that is under my muscle memory, i.e. there is no conscious part of my brain that is required to do, well, there will be some conscious part, but very little of the conscious part of my brain required to execute that thing. Now, there are caveats to that. So there might be, for instance, if I was playing you a very specific melodic phrase, but the conscious part of my brain was interfering with the rhythmic. It's a little bit like tapping your belly and rubbing your head or the other way around. Because my time feel and my rhythmic ability is not separated entirely in terms of conscious and subconscious. So, for instance, if we were having a conversation... Pardon?
It's instantaneous.
No, it's too late. I've done that one already.
Have you? I'm so sorry then, because that would be quite rude now. So I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's fine. We can edit your rudeness out.
A rude plinterruption.
All you've done there, Jake, is set Dan up, and that's even worse.
I really hope that Pliny listens to this episode.
He's the Michael Jordan to my other guy.
I was going to say he'll be plim pressed, but that doesn't work. So never mind. Yeah, so I can't remember what I was saying. So now it's even worse.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, so basically, I was trying to give an example of where that might fall apart. So, for example, I could play you a melody that's relatively rhythmically complex if I had it in my muscle memory. But if I was holding a conversation with you specifically and the rhythmic things were they weren't kind of really confident. So I could have the fingering really confident in muscle memory, but not the rhythm. It might not be solid enough. So there are elements, there's layers of things that can be more integrated into muscle memory. I think the term muscle is slightly misleading.
Yes, yeah.
It's not. Okay. It's not necessarily muscle. Does anyone know where that comes from? What's the specifics of muscle mememory? Is that musician related, or is that a wider term that relates to other disciplines?
Related, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So if I think that's a really important thing is to take the word muscle and not be too literal with that, because it's a cerebral thing as much as it is a muscular thing for me.
Yeah, for you, that's a really good point. So one of the things I think I mentioned on the bonus episode was about this idea of it literally being a case that if you were to trigger in your mind a series of phrases, notes, riffs, or whatever, and if you were to screw up, you couldn't start it from that any point within it. So that was a literal sense of you don't understand necessarily what your fingers are doing. You just are the muscles have learnt this pathway through the phrase, through the riffs, whatever, and you have to then go back to the beginning in order to execute it. I think what you're talking about, Tom, might be slightly different. Perhaps
depends. I was thinking about this when I was listening back to the podcast earlier.
Okay, right.
I was imagining myself on a gig playing, or on a clinic playing through some of the melodies, because there's two. You guys will probably do the same thing, or I'd be intrigued if you do actually. When I play the melodies to either my tunes or the things that I'm going to play, I categorize those in a very different way. I learn them by their sound and shape on the instrument.
And that would be the type of muscle memory we're talking here.
So you were talking about it in the previous podcast. You were talking about that distinction where you're not thinking like you can do it with melodies for standards, where you can learn them just by physically how they fit on the guitar. And that's how I learned the chord progression to giant steps in the early days of my jazz playing. So I could only play it one way. And if you asked me what the chords were, I could sort of list them off for you, but I couldn't play them any other way at the speed that they would be required for the actual tune. There was no ability to manipulate any of that information. And I still, to this day, will learn melodies in that way. And there's a discipline that's required to execute material that way and not screw it up, which is to allow yourself the ability to not think at all when you do it and just listen to what you play and not engage your brain in an analytical way at all. Because as soon as you do, you run the risk of thinking too hard and making yourself screw up. So you have to have the ability to have faith, if you like, in that part of your brain just doing its job. And there's almost a weird confidence required to do that. Because I find that the time I screw up is as soon as I start thinking about it, and that it breaks the muscle memory pathway, if you like.
But another type of muscle memory that you could demonstrate right now is if you were to grab your guitar and start continue the podcast whilst you are shredding through legato, and that is a different sort of muscle memory. I might posit that
absolutely
what you're doing in those sort of instances is exhibiting or playing through, mindlessly sort of like streaming eighth notes through changes. That's it. I think it's still, we might use the same term, but I think it's in a slightly different, perhaps different way.
Yeah, because again, I think it's degrees of consciousness. So if I had to do, I don't know if listeners know what we're talking about, but I think a lot of the guys will have heard this happen. I'd be surprised, maybe, if you couldn't do this now as well, where you hold a conversation with somebody. It's a proper conversation. You're having all the nuances and all of the kind of the minutiae of the conversation is still there, but you can play through a particular harmonic area and improvise lines on the fretboard. So he's grabbing his guitar now. What I would struggle with is to have to consciously think about changes whilst doing that, because that disengages the part of the brain that is doing the conversation. So it has to engage with the chord changes. So that's no longer, maybe we need another terms like cerebral or subconscious memory. I don't know what you call it, but it would disengage if we were having the conversation and I had to think about what the next chord change was.
I think we can agree that there is a relegation to subconscious processing, right? That there is some sort of automatic feeling to it. And one of the things that I find is that there is a very positive side to muscle memory. And then there are a few negative sides, such as you mentioned, that whole thing of if you get lost in it, if you think about it, things get sort of absolutely dashed. You don't know where you are. You've got no kind of compass, if you like. And the other negative is, I think, I've noticed in a lot of intermediate players that their muscle memory is such that they can remember vocabulary, but only only close or closer to the tempo that they learnt it in.
Oh, interesting. Yes, that's a really good point.
It kind of stretches back to their muscle memory of executing that physical task.
That's a really good point. Yeah,
so we need to say that I think one of the best things you can do is to get used to acclimatizing your muscle memory to different tempo scenarios, and it's like keeping it flexible and just developing the mental discipline, the mental habit of not switching off entirely. And it's kind of this again, it's that whole zone thing where you're in that mental state of being alert and observant, but you're not getting in your own way.
See, I'm not 100% sure about this. So I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody like John Petrucci or Paul Gilbert playing in Mr. Big or Eddie Van Halen playing in Van Halen. You cannot be, because what you've got there is you've got a combination of two factors. You've got the fact that you have to be able to play the material, but you have to be able to play it so freely and without any kind of conscious thought that you can strut around the stage doing the frontman or sideman thing as well, being the guitar player in the band, spinning the guitar, not John Petrucci obviously, but the kind of 80s superstar spandex guitar player, throwing the guitar around, really doing the theatrics. You cannot do that unless that material is absolutely firmly implanted literally in the fingers and in the cerebrum. And that it's not learnt in such a way that you have this conscious fallback, because you have to do the choreography that goes with it at the same time.
Yeah, there are layers to this. And what you're talking about, I think, has a lot to do with the way in which we learn via sequence, and that thing of like starting at A and ending up at B. I think that whole gig scenario is really about that. One of the things I do find though is that it's almost very easy to switch off and then come back and then get a bit lost. And I suppose you deal with that by doing the gig a lot, so that you're just kind of taking these weird subconscious cues to know where you are without knowing where you are, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder what would happen if you took, let's say you had a Dream Theater gig and you surreptitiously took the set list and moved everything around.
I think they do.
Right, so that's even more impressive.
They are. I'm pretty sure, if I got this right, that they would write different set lists for different.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I say that's more impressive, even more impressive, because if you take Jake's idea of sequencing A to B, B to C, C to D, it's the choreography of the gig. If you can then take that material and change the order of it, there's no staged choreography with their stuff either. I mean, I don't think there was much staged choreography with most of these kind of very visual bands. Dream Theater are more visual in a literal sense, as in they have graphics behind them and stuff and all this stage theatrics going on. But I'm more talking about...
But they're not manipulating that at all, though, are they? I mean, there's no... I mean, with Dream Theater, it's a recital of the record, isn't it, every time? There's no...
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it is a recital of the record, but it's a recital of the record within the framework of... When you go and see a fusion band, where they're playing all this complex music that's obviously a lot of it's improvised, but there's these very complex written parts. It's the nearest analogy without the improvisation that you can get to a Dream Theater style gig. You have very static playing going on. There's not a lot of not choreography. Choreography is the wrong word because it sounds like it's worked out. But there's a lot of movement going on, a lot of interactivity between the bands. There's a lot of, you've got to be at this place at this point. You've got to do the switching at the right point. All of that
the
stuff.
Performance aspects.
There's a massive performance. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't just go. You don't go to any of these gigs. Dream Theater, Steve Vai, whoever. You don't go to these gigs and there's just people stood playing, which is what I do when I do a gig. I just stand and play because it's all about the improvisation. To be able to do that to the level they're doing it with, the level of complexity that they're working with, to me is, I mean, it's both staggering and terrifying. The idea of having to do it terrifies me from a muscle memory perspective. Because I don't think, sorry, Jay, just to say one more thing, I don't think that they learn that stuff, and I'd be very intrigued to get him back on again to ask him, actually. We should do that. Is to ask him, do you learn that material by playing it over and over and over again with no regard to the context of how it fits to the chord structure? So you would have a fallback method of figuring out what it would be, or if you forgot it. Or do you just learn it by playing it over and over and over again to the point where if you think about it, you'll screw up. But if you don't think about it and you go with the flow and you allow yourself to perform, it just happens.
I
believe it's the latter. I have to believe it's the latter.
I wanted to answer that. Oh, man. Yeah.
Just a thought occurred to me while you were talking, which was that,
sorry.
which was that the complexity of a thing is sometimes really useful for like muscle memory markers. Like sometimes you feel as though you're on like a roller coaster and you're feeling every twist and turn as you go. Whereas sometimes when that complexity falls away and you have very simple things to concern yourself with, those things can be really difficult to keep track of and, remember where you are. It's a bit like that kind of, I'm trying to think, something like, So What, Miles Davis, trying to remember how many D minor, how many bars of D minor you've played.
Are we moving up? Oh,
and
no.
you do, the more you play it, you learn to gradually feel that, and then someone might subconsciously say, with their playing, okay, now here's the one, like a drum fill into the one.
Well, it's like how many A sections of Very Early have we done?
Precisely.
I've been working on that. I can't wait till we can jam that again because I've been really hammering that.
But you get the idea. I think there is a while complexity is difficult, there is also, or it also presents a helping hand for the sort of sequential memory.
It does, yeah.
Things that don't have that are a challenge in another way.
Yeah, I mean, I find it much easier to remember, vastly easier to remember complex chord progressions than I do pop chord progressions, where you have smaller amounts of information presented in much more variability than you do with much more information, but those individual chords appear less frequently. And I find it easier to remember sequences of more information than I do to remember less information in more complex sequences, if that makes sense.
It totally does.
Yeah.
Because I tend to remember standards that have odd progressions better than I do where they have very common cyclical or, very, like Very is a decent example, or something like Blue and Green, where it's an odd.
I was
bar,
thinking Blue and Green as well, yeah.
or Spain, like those. I kind of remember those because they're odd, and sometimes I can interchangeably mix and screw up, like Blues for Alice or something else that's or I think that's
whereas trying to remember which minor 2/5 you're on in Beautiful Love is really difficult. Or Alone Together.
Yeah, that's another one I was thinking of. But maybe this is a slightly different topic, but I'd be really interested to know about Jake and Dan's thoughts on this. Tom, I know you and I are very similar in this regard to leaning on the chart for improvisation and playing through changes and things. But how do you, obviously both Jake and Dan are great jazz changes players, and so how do you guys feel about that in terms of memorizing and playing through things? Do you find it better if you've learned to memorize changes to be able to improvise through it, or do you always feel more comfortable if you're looking at a chart for priming what's coming next? And whoever wants to take that.
Interestingly, one of the things that you said there about memorizing or remembering slightly more simple things perhaps is one thing that did take me a bit of was things like turnarounds and things at the end of some of these swing tunes, because it's like a limited there's like a limited number of variations and possibilities, and it's going to be one of them. But remembering if it went like C sharp diminished, D minor 7 G7, or did it go C E flat, or did it go C A7 D7, or did it go C A7 D minor? Like these little snippets of information where it's like, I know it's one of them, but for some reason, because it's just like 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2, because they go by quite quick. Remembering those was quite difficult. But when I first joined the band, I went and met Pete, and he basically said, like, I think they were in a bit of, they needed someone like ASAP basically, and he's like, oh, can you do a gig next weekend? And I just got given a CD with like 30 tunes that I had to learn, so no charts or anything. And at that point, I think I probably was in a position back then anyway, I probably was at a point where I was very visual sort of reading based, because that was off the back of cruise ships when you're reading everything. So you're not remembering, it's like part of your brain doesn't really take it in when you're doing the reading thing. It does after a while, but you have to sort of engage it and go, right, I'm going to remember this. Because you can just look at the thing and read it, and it doesn't, it's like it just goes in and then comes straight out. It doesn't stay. But I did find myself gravitating towards looking at things in, like if I'm trying to remember maybe something like Spain or something, I will probably be thinking chord for chord in terms of remembering stuff. Whereas some of the other types of things that I'll remember, it'll be like zoomed out. So it might be like I'll remember things in lines. So it'll be like 4 chord line, or even that's an 8 chord section. And we've talked a little bit about this in the last one, about depends what kind of harmony's going on. But I did find that initially I was like, right, it's that chord, then it goes there, then it goes there. Then it was, right, that's those 4 chords. And then I was sort of zooming further and further out.
What if we were going to have like a grotesque 4-way guitar jam on some standard right now, and we called something like "Never Be Another You."
How plain sensitive.
Oh
yes, there we go. Well done, sir. Well done.
Plain settlement. Oh, damn it.
Yeah. Okay. How plain sensitive? We'll call that. So. Is that something that we all know and have played a fair bunch? Obviously, Tom, yes.
I've played it quite a bunch, but I couldn't reel it off now because I haven't done that kind of thing for a while.
Yeah, pathetic at memorizing these things, just terrible.
That was kind of my question or my point, I guess. That's where I was going with this. What I wanted to ask. So, but do you think put to one side that you are terrible at memorizing those things, but when do you play better? Do you play better on that kind of thing when you have the chart to prime you for what's coming next, or when you have, by hook or by crook, by brute force, have shoved it into the memory, even if it's only on a temporary basis? Do you play better then?
Can I answer this, sir?
Well, I'm really interested to what Jake says, actually, because I kind of know what you're going to say. but yeah, I mean, obviously in a moment. But just if Jake, do you want to? I'd be really curious.
It depends. I think if the changes go by thick and fast, I find the visual aid really helpful. And if the changes are a bit unusual, difficult to memorize, I find them really helpful just to sort of keep me on track. But for most of the time, although bear in mind I don't do this as much as you guys, I would have to say that learning the changes on a conceptual harmonic relationship level is probably my best tactic. It's like the thing I would, if I have time, I would fall to do that rather than go to a gig with the paper. But obviously, life gets in the way of some of this stuff, so you have to be able to do both.
Okay, talk about that a little bit deeper. So if you're saying on a harmonic relationship level, for me and for the listeners, be slightly more specific about what you mean.
So a kind of Roman numerals type thing, because I find the note names to be extremely abstract concepts to remember. So I'm often better at Roman numeral type things, although it gets a bit analytically lax. If you're changing keys, you might just go, oh, and then it goes there.
That's super interesting to me. So here's my take on that, and this is what I wanted to answer the question when Boo was asking it. This is very similar to me to the parental scale thing that people talk about, this two-step process to the information. I find the harmonic analysis thing, obviously when I'm looking at a tune, I have to do the harmonic analysis in some instances to know what to play over it. So that's one stage of the argument. If I then learn the thing by its harmonic, how all the chords relate to each other harmonically. So it might be a 2-5-1 in this key, a 2-5-1 in that key, a 2-5-1. There is a layer of translation that has to happen in between that information and me being able to play it, which is that I have to take what that harmonic relationship is and then apply it to the given keys. That because how else can you do that? It has to be a 2-5 in something and then another related 2-5 in something, then a 2-5 in something.
Yeah, it's something in the middle of that, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, even if it is something in the middle, I'm not saying it's worse or better, by the way. I'm just telling you what has to happen for me to have this stuff down. I have to learn the specifics, which is bad in one way because it means I cannot transpose that stuff in real time. But the number of times I would need to transpose that stuff in real time is so minute, unless I'm a jazz Nazi who wants to go on a gig and just do that because I want to make someone else feel bad.
That's fair play, yeah, because...
there's no other reason why I would need to do that.
How many times is someone going to call all the things in E major?
Exactly. So
it's not going to happen. Singer that is very specific.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And I don't ever play with singers, not because I don't like singers, but
it's possibly the thing that's different here. Then is that doing less kind of bespoke fusiony gigs.
I don't do any of those either.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. It's like there are reasons why you might want to go down that route, but I still, like, I did make the caveat, which was things get a bit more blurry when it comes to changing key. But if I'm playing, like, let's say a blues, whatever the given key it's in, I'm totally Roman numerals. Like, I would go by forgetting what chord 6 was note name wise, right? It would just be chord 6.
But there's got to be a translation process somewhere, hasn't there?
Unless you're looking at the root note of the key and visually finding chord 6, how are you doing that process then?
That is what's happening, I think, is that it's relational to the other notes on the fretboard.
And Jake's brain just does that so quickly that it's subconscious. It's muscle. It's brain muscle memory.
So this is the thing. There's two. This is where the two not the 2-point thing that we talk about, but there's 2 points at play here, which is that when you first do some of this stuff, it can seem from an outsider's point of view that this is literally two things that are happening. One has to happen first, and the second has to happen, and it is that. But they become so unified at some point in this process that they become one thing, and then they don't really become anything. It's just automatic, and I totally get that. But the thing is, for me, what I like to do is when I'm improvising, we've talked about this loads of times, I don't think about the chord that I'm on, I think about the chord that I'm going to.
Yeah.
And so the way I get good at improvising over chord, this is where the caveat lies for me, is that the reason I really like to look at a chart is because I can engage my brain less, because I can physically look at the next chord before it happens.
Yeah, totally.
And this is where this whole thing of, do you play better if you look at a chart or if you memorize the chord changes? Well, that depends on how well I've memorized the chord changes. Because if I've memorized the chord changes, but I'm having to engage my brain to flag up what the next one is, I've still memorized them. It's just that they're not automatically flagging up without some kind of cerebral engagement.
Yeah, so you will play better if that
By
is
looking at
flagging
the
it
chart.
up for you. And
Yes.
that's exactly the hole I've found myself in
Exactly.
some ways.
But with something that I am mega familiar with, where there is no barrier to, I just automatically know what the next chord is without any engagement of my brain at all. It is literally like constructing a sentence in real time. I have no thought for the syntax. I just say it. The vocabulary is no issue. That's fine. I will genuinely play better over that. But 95% of the time, because getting a standard that well into my head, or any chord progression that well into my head, is really playing it over and over and over and over again. And I just don't have time to do that with 500 standards.
Tom,
So
sorry.
go on.
No, just a thought occurred to me just then on that very point. Do you find that you're chunking bits of information at all?
No.
It's just individual islands of chords.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously there can't be no chunking going on, because if I think about Stella, I'm obviously, just by virtue of the fact that the way I've been educated, I'm chunking E minor 7 and A7 altered, then, C minor 7, then F7. There's 2-5, 2-5. But I don't learn them by their 2-5 relationship. I just
Do you
know
learn the
that-
fretboard that way? Like, do you learn to access those sounds with a fingering in a kind of chunking way? Like feeling the difference between
No, I don't think
one
so.
chord and the next?
No.
Okay, right. That's interesting to me.
No, because and I know why that is the case, is because, and this is the reason why that's a no is because you can Russian roulette the real book for Tom, and possibly for me to a lesser degree, and we can have almost equal.
I would say totally equal.
No, let me be clear here. I don't mean between you and I. What I mean is between us and the book.
No, I know.
So-
That's what I'm saying. If you change
Yeah.
the key, I would play over it just as well as if it was in the original key.
Exactly. So you could pick almost any chord progression, and I would feel equally comfortable over any of those chord progressions, which maybe is a bad thing,
No,
but that
but-
was kind of my goal about learning to play over changes and what it is I was.
I still think, though, that you are chunking conceptually, though. Like, say, for Spain, you're chunking...
No, I'm not. And I can tell you why I'm not. It's because of the very, very localized way that I see the fretboard. I am not chunking anything other than, if I was chunking anything, and I don't think I am, it's really hard to explain. If you are chunking the relationship of, let's say for instance, what?
Sorry, just the word chunkings now sounds really strange.
Said it too many times. We need another word for chunk. I'm just going to keep saying it now. If you chunk the chunks, and say, for instance, you see an E minor 7 flat 5 chord voicing with the root note on the A string, and you see it physically dropping down to the 5th fret of the E string, and then you play an A7 sharp 5 or whatever, and you chunk. Thank you very much. That's a beautiful tone. If you chunk those things, or if you had other voicings and you chunk them, or if you saw the scale as like, let's say you're doing an E locker in and you saw on the A string 7 8 10, then 7 8 10 on the D, then 7 9 on the G. This is my guitar slave demonstrating, and it drops down and you see a sort of an A altered 5 6 8 4 6 8 so on and so forth. There's some chunking of those two things going on together, and obviously, if you've learned any of that, you can't ever switch it off. But that is not what's happening when I am improvising over the any given chord progression, there is way, way, way more localized information going on because of this 2-point geometric system that's in play. So I am not doing that kind of systematic shape-based chunking that's going on that I totally get, by the way, and I can't switch that off because I have had that in my playing in the past. But that's not how I think at all when I improvise over anything.
It's very interesting. I've never actually had this conversation at this much depth with someone who knows that much about it. And listening to you talk about this particular issue probably highlights the importance of that way of thinking as you describe. However, it is so opposed by its very nature to the vocabulary argument.
Oh, and this is a really good point, because I don't feel like I have much vocabulary in the traditional sense. I can make my way through. I would posit, and this is not meant to sound the way it does, I don't think you could stick a set of changes in front of me that I couldn't play over at sight. What that doesn't say is that I don't think you could stick, like if you stuck confirmation in front of me right now, a bebop stand, real bebop tune, you wouldn't get a lot of bebop vocabulary out of it. It wouldn't be stylistically correct, but I would make those changes no problem at all. And you could change the key to anything and just stick it in front of me at sight and I would play over it no problem. But I'm not a vocabulary guy in that way.
But it's almost like you've kind of, like horses have the blinkers on and that you're so focused on the issue of getting to the notes in that chord that you just have to relegate other aspects of things to one side, and that's where your art comes from. And I think that a lot of other people will be probably a bit scared to do that because what will come out won't sound like what they want to sound like.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing in a way. If you take blues is a really good example of this and country, because they rely on the tuning of the guitar. So you cannot take that information and play that vocabulary. It just doesn't fit. What I've done with my guitar playing is I've taken less vocabulary, but more of what you, Jake, called the guitarcheology of the fretboard, as in the exploration of the fretboard. And I really feel like I know my fretboard absolutely inside out, within reason.
Yeah,
like if you're combining 3 or 4 notes at the same time in a polyphonic way, that's a different thing altogether. I feel like I can combine 2 notes together no problem and be pretty free. But if you're combining 3 or 4 notes, so you're really getting into polyphony, that's a lot harder to do in real time. But what I haven't done is I've never learnt to play bebop. I've never learnt to play country. I've never learnt to play in particular stylistic bends that require a very specific key or a very specific. That's not the same with bebop, of course. On the guitar, but that requires. I can play bebop in a way. I have all the right chromaticism. I could faux bebop if I needed to,
So you don't
but
have
it
the
isn't
slang.
bebop. Yeah, it's not bebop, and I don't have the technique for it. I don't have the vocabulary for it. It's not. Let's bring it back round again. It's not part of my muscle memory. And the point is, when I'm playing over changes like that, there's less muscle memory involved, actually. It's more real-time processing that's going on. There is loads of muscle memory going on, but it isn't this whole thing of placing chunks of muscle memory in sequence to fit with the changes in that key, because that's what I've learned to do. It's more kind of real-time processing that's going on.
It's real-time processing. Now, this is something I think we may be coming to the one of the questions you get with legato so much is it's real-time processing that is going on in the back of your mind. That it was once real-time processing.
Okay, yeah.
That has become secondary and subconscious processing. And this is the way in which I think you either knowingly or unknowingly teach this stuff, I think, is that because you talk about it when you talk about like doing the legato through different harmonic areas and stuff, is like you're talking about that as a muscle memory, but it was once something that was very slow and deliberate and conscious. And I think sometimes it's easy to misconstrue that as to think, well, these are all, if I just learn enough licks or if I learn enough whatever, then that will sort of come through. But I don't think that is the case, is it? I mean, there was a point where whether you're talking about legato, whether you're talking about changes like playing, was so painfully slow at one point. Well, again, I didn't know you back then, so I don't know. But for me, when I was going through this process, it was absolutely that so painfully slow that it was I couldn't not get it right, because I was going like it's completely out of time and so slow that I could only do the right thing and find it.
But this is why I would never, and I never have described myself as a consummate musician or a versatile guitar player. I think weirdly some people think I am, but I would, the way Jake described the Blinkers, I would describe myself as a laser focused guitar player.
Yeah, it's the same. It's a different way of putting it.
It's exactly the same
I realised my way was.
That's not what I was thinking. I wasn't worried about that.
The focus is what I meant, but in order to focus, you have to blur other things out.
No, it's fine. That's
like a 2-chord
just
field
occurred
of
to
view
me
at
that,
any one point.
When you first said it, I didn't even think about it, but yeah, okay. It's the same thing, but I mean, like for instance, if I was to sit down, again, bringing muscle memory back into it, I have no muscle memory or vocabulary or whatever for the blues. And when I play the blues, I have, you stick a set of blues changes in front of me. The way I sound good on the blues is if you stick a shed load of changes in it. The more changes, the better I sound.
That's Dan's old thing. I never forget when Dan came up with this idea of like the changes are doing the work for you.
Yeah.
That's great analysis of.
I've got my blinkers on and the changes are doing the work.
Interestingly,
all I'm doing is writing the changes.
Interestingly, Tom,
like those changes to climax.
off the back of all that stuff that you just said, Tom, about how you operate in real time with improvisation and stuff. If you were like, say you decided, right, I'm gonna do the blues thing or I'm gonna do the bebop thing, given how you kind of take in or potentially use the information that you have and how you've learnt things and practiced things in the past, how do you think you would struggle in terms of trying to do the vocab thing now? Do you think, like, because obviously I guess the traditional thing for anyone that's got vocab is they just listen to something, transcribe, and then it's just sort of there. They just sort of have it then. They sort of have ownership of it and then they do stuff with it. But given how your brain works, would you think you would find that difficult?
I don't know if I would find it difficult. I think I know what would happen. I think I would find it deeply satisfying in the short term and very unsatisfying in the long term. Because I'm so used to engaging a particular part of my brain where there's a sort of element of freedom with this. By the way, this could totally be construed as a bad thing. I would totally get that from a, say you were a gigging musician and you had to maintain the interest of the audience and you had to give them a show and you had to kind of build the solo, so on and so forth. What I'm doing is I'm just interested in playing over the changes and trying to construct things that are interesting to me through the changes. It's as simple as that. I've never told anybody else that's what I'm doing. I've never tried to paint any other picture. It just so happens that some people quite like what I do, and that's great. But if I decided to become a really vocabulary-based player, I'm pretty sure my brain would have very short-term satisfaction from learning the vocabulary and hearing it played over that material, so it sounded authentic, and then I would become very bored with it. Just because it doesn't engage the part of my brain that gets satisfied when I improvise. Because I'm just basically playing, I'm just playing rehearsed material back. What I don't think would happen, it might inform some of the choices that I make when I improvise, but I would never feel it was authentic enough. And it's partly to do with my very, again, blinkered or laser focused technique. I have such a specific technical approach. I mean, it's very hard to describe to you guys how bad my right hand is, because people always tell me off for it, and we've discussed this many times. They're like, no, you can pick. It's not the same thing. I have really poor right hand technique. If you ask me to pick a G major scale at 80 BPM playing 16th notes or 8th note triplets, I can't do it. I cannot do it with any consistency. So many of these styles, the vocabulary requires a particular set of, or an ability to nuance in a certain, an ability to nuance in a certain way, an accent in a certain way, and I can't do it. So I've ended up with a laser-focused technique and a laser-focused mindset as to what I want to achieve when I'm improvising, and therefore vocabulary doesn't really come into it for me. I'm just not a good blues player or country player or a funk player or whatever. I do my thing and that's it. That's all I can do, and that's okay.
I think there's a specificity. That's the one. Specificity.
Specificity
with the sort of vocab thing, because there's been like these things that I am potentially good at sort of faking, but it's not proper vocab, and that's probably from a potentially similar mindset where you could probably hear something someone go, oh, it's you can hear it and go, oh, it's doing a thing with sixths and there's some pull-offs, so I will improvise using sixths and do some pull-offs. So it's kind of like it's like quasi vocab kind of thing.
Yeah.
But just as this is just a thought that came to me on the vocab thing, because like I said about the gig, trying to improvise and be in and vocab and legit and stuff like that. And it's something that I've thought about for ages because I've tried to learn so many different styles and stuff over the years. Is the vocab thing like amassing ingredients until you have enough to make a meal, and then you amass a few more ingredients, and then that kind of shapes the meal slightly different. And then maybe you take those other ingredients and it's the same sort of meal but slightly different. It's almost like eventually you just have enough that I don't want to say it feels like improvising, because that sounds like I'm saying it's not improvised, but eventually you have enough of these things that you put them all together, and eventually it becomes this sort of language sort of thing.
Yeah, I would love to sit down on a personal level with a guitar player who would class themselves as being very vocabulary based, because I don't think I actually get the vocabulary thing properly. I find it quite mysterious. Like, essentially the vocabulary thing has to come from listen and transcribe. It has to, because you can't really, you can learn the vocabulary from the page or you can be taught it by somebody else, but realistically it must come from years and years of listening and playing back the material that you want to be able to play. But that's never how I've approached learning improvisation, ever. What I've done is a much more academic version. And again, I get that you could totally argue that you can hear this, and someone might really be critical, and they would, I'm sure I get this all the time. I would imagine the criticism of this would be, yeah, but you sound academic. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. If that's the way I've ended up sounding, but that pleases me in my own playing, why would I do stuff that pleases other people? That's what I do, what pleases me. And this whole thing of learning vocabulary to sound like a certain style, by the way, I'm not down on it. I think it's, some of my favorite players, I think, are totally vocabulary based and would argue for that vocabulary muscle memory based thing that's not very flexible. It's you're playing lick based playing, basically. But I don't really get it. I don't think I quite understand how you even get there. I don't really understand what it is. Are they solid bits of information that you're manipulating, or not even manipulating, you're just playing them, and there's thousands and thousands of them? Or are they little bits of tangible information, at which point I'm not sure what you mean by vocabulary anymore?
It's almost like if you change it too much, is it even vocab, bro? Do you know what I mean? Like if you take too many liberties with the original idea from a 1930 whatever sort of recording, like is it when does it go from vocab to then, like how far can you go with it until it's no longer, how far can you take it before it's no longer legit?
Vocab people are putting the blinkers on as well.
Yes,
they're exactly doing that, or laser focusing on their thing, and just having this kind of selective process where they don't play things that fit inside the vocab of that moment, and they might stretch it at the boundaries every now and then to make sense. But I think there's maybe something there.
I think
with vibrato. Sorry, just quickly, with vibrato is something that I think gives away a vocab, right? Like a blues vibrato is very specific to that. If you tried playing that stuff with, like on Polyphia or something, it just wouldn't kind of gel. So I think there is a kind of a link up between not just vocabulary of that sort, but it's also the muscle memory execution of that vocabulary that makes someone laser focus onto that thing. Whereas if you take off the restraints to do those things and open up things, you might get kind of weird choice paralysis or let too much stuff in that doesn't really work with that genre.
Yeah, I think the thing that's confusing for me is how you go from, like, if you imagine a head like you know that head.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what standard it is. What's that called?
Ah, bloody hell.
Whatever it's called. Someone will tell us on the. You see, I don't know my bebop stuff so well. I don't quite get. Obviously, all of that would be described as vocab. But where does it break down to the little individual chunks of vocab that you can utilize? Because it's a melody in a way. So, you know, I've never understood, by the way, I'm sure it's right, but I've never understood. No one's ever taught me, or I've never had educational information which has led me to this point. How you take that head, and other than just learning 5 million other heads like that and hoping that you will develop the ability to just do that yourself, just hear it and be able to play it, I don't understand how you break that down and just suddenly, not suddenly, but how you incorporate that vocabulary unless you literally play it as it is presented to you. I don't really get it.
So
I'm not criticizing it. I don't get it. It's my flaw. I want someone to explain it to me.
So here's how I would conceptualize that issue, which is I think that you might have a lick that hits certain points in the scale, whatever, and you know their function, and then you go through with a start. Usually, I mean, well, vocabulary doesn't really work without a kind of syntactical style, if you like. I probably just butchered the explanation there. But basically, you would then create variations on that thing that were, as you understood it, within that style. And so it's a bit like that theme and variation thing you get with the call and response blues type playing, where you do start with something that's like totally legitimately SRV, and then you've got to come up with something that's extrapolated from that.
But
And then it's like you are using your vocabulary to construct that out of nuggets.
But this obviously leads to another question, which is, and we've gone way
Bugger.
past 9:30. No, yes, sorry. Maybe it's a short one. I don't know. Are you doing that so that you can then do it in real time, or are you doing it so you construct enough of them that you don't have to do it in real time?
Well, I think the thing with that style, for example, is that what you're doing in real time is you're doing the sort of reactive rhetorical work, right? So the choice of phrase B after phrase A, the quality of a blues player is measured in some way by how those two things relate.
But are phrase A and phrase B fixed from a bunch of things that you've played before, or are they actually flexible in that you are improvising them, and once you've heard the thing that you improvised, obviously improvised is a slightly weird, wide or slim word depending on where you're coming from stylistically, but let's use it. So are you improvising A and then reacting to A with an improvised B, or are you pulling subconsciously from a pool of things that you've learnt and have fixed, this huge pool, and then pulling after you've pulled lick A, are you pulling lick B from a pool of things that you subconsciously found fitted with A?
Yeah,
this is the bit I don't get.
It's B, but it's B with some plasticity.
Some of A. Okay.
It's B with some plasticity.
So this is what I think is in this, is that ultimately those two things blur, and the one is kind of useless without the other. So I think where Jake said language vocab players also have the blinkers on. Yes, this is true and absolutely to the extent of when you're acquiring this stuff, or when you're learning or teaching this stuff, it's kind of useless to try to learn unless you've kind of won the lottery. I think it's useless to learn like all those thousands of various different things with listening without any kind of intellectual awareness of what's going on. So I know for me, if I go back to the whole college days in LCM of like getting lambasted and going, listen and transcribe, yet I wasn't really taught how to listen and transcribe and what that meant. And so it was only much, much, much later where if I take down a Charlie Parker line over an altered dominant seventh or some kind of 7-flat-9 chord. It's only having that awareness as I'm taking that line and lick down of what it all means in relation to the harmony of that chord that it actually builds itself and layers itself into my understanding and awareness of the sound and of how that could possibly then be manipulated. And over the start of lockdown, I actually started this, in fact, this process in this book here, right? I've got waving to the cameras if the audience can see it, but this is BB's Bebop Bible, and so I started going through these early Parker things, taking things down, but now with the knowledge and the information that I do have, and it kind of makes so much more sense. I think I'm able to hopefully that stuff will become manipulable because I have the understanding of it. And if I do that enough and acquire enough of the information, then I hope and trust that will feed into a kind of manipulable vocabulary. That's my hypothesis anyway.
It's very interesting, yeah.
I like when I think about like vocab and useful stuff, like I try wherever possible to have the smallest bits of malleable information when it comes to vocab. Like I try and reduce it to, like you see these if like here's a lick and then it's like 16 bars long. In my head I'm like, well, that's not a lick, is it? Do you know what I mean? I'm not mean to offend or slag off the entire guitar community with something like that, but when people go, oh, here's a lick, to me, if someone says here's a lick or here's an idea, I want it to be as malleable as possible. And if I'm teaching somebody like a little idea, I will go, here's the idea, this is what it is, and this is where you can use it. So it's not just the idea. I think there is, there's a very different thing between just listening and going, that's where his fingers were, so I'm going to put my fingers in the same place. And it kind of happened there in the song. Yeah, but most of the time it'll either be this is where the thing is happening, so it's over the one chord, or another bit of vocab might be you can use this from getting from 1 to 4, or you can use this on the 4, or you can use this on the.
So I can sort of demonstrate what I'm talking about. So and this is just going on and on now, so I apologise.
It's way past 9:30. What did I say? We're going to lock this down by 9:30.
Are we talking like if we've got a G7? Can you hear that?
Yeah, I can hear it.
I bet you wish you couldn't because it's out of tune. Are we talking about a piece of vocabulary might be like, is that a piece of vocabulary?
I'd say that was 2.
So this is a piece of vocabulary?
Yeah. In my head, the way my brain works.
That's interesting. That to me, maybe it's just defining things then, because that to me doesn't feel like a piece of vocabulary. That feels like a cerebral idea that it could be fit, because the reason I don't call that a piece of vocabulary, I'm not disagreeing with you, Dan.
No. I mean,
it's not
maybe the terminology
it's just the way
is
that
off.
I catalogue. Yeah, between us, I would say. So this is just literally catalogued in my brain as 1 to the flat 7, but with a chromatic passing tone.
Yeah, and I would see that as that is something that you can do in that situation between the 1 and the flat 7, and then you can do that in any octave. You can do that anywhere. Maybe vocab is
stylistically, that doesn't really, to me, like that could be, or the point for me with this stuff is that rather than being a piece of vocabulary, is just this concept that I don't really know how to describe it. It's a note-based concept that is a tiny, tiny piece of information that's manipulable, but can go anywhere from that point. So I think what I try to do in my improvisation is have tiny, tiny manipulable piece of information. So I would see it like this. That to me maybe is the nearest thing I can think of as being a piece of vocabulary.
It's kind of what I was saying when I was saying, I would take things to the smallest, like maybe something that's a bit more, again, maybe fits more with the vocab thing, is if you do like, when you do the thing when you go like 3, 5, 6, 1, but you hammer into the 3 or slide into 3. It's almost bluegrassy.
You're talking about that?
Or like da-da-da-da-da, like you go up. Like,
Oh.
I would take some. Yeah, exactly.
That kind of a thing.
Like that could the out in that, if you like, to use maybe stand-up comedian or magician talk. Like the out from that could be a number of things. Do you know what I mean? Or the in fact, it could be like 1, 2, 3, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah,
Could be
now
one,
that's
da-da-da-da.
really interesting because there's a rhythmic element to that as well. So like going,
Yeah.
that I could see as being a piece of vocabulary from a rhythmic perspective and a note choice perspective, because you've got that 6 bending the minor third up to the sort of major third, so on and so forth. And I sort of get that, but I don't think I get what bebop vocabulary is, and that's my flaw. I need someone to explain that to me.
Well, you could pick a few things, couldn't you? You could pick the sort of triplet turn,
Yeah.
like you could just pick stuff like that, and types of things like that seem like articulation based. Then it would be connecting them to relevant, heavily chord tone arpeggio.
Yeah, and this is the thing. So rather than having vocabulary, I feel like
We're doing the
I can
sort of
do all
we're doing the, I said before about the whole, you can kind of hear it and go, oh, they're kind of doing that. So you can go, oh, well, they're sliding into an arpeggio from a semitone below, and then maybe it goes chromatic down from there. It's kind of like...
But here's the thing. If you do that, you reinvent the wheel a bit. And sometimes there are some really, really amazing bits of vocab that absolutely crystallize like a kind of an amazing thing that we all should know or be able to do.
like the lick.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And it's not just the notes, is it? It's the way it's phrased, it's the accent groups, it's all that sort of thing. And this is where the blues thing comes in, because it's not...
Yeah.
It comes in as a 3-dimensional unit.
Right.
With all of those, you mentioned rhythm. Well, let's add a few more layers onto that with
Articulation.
dynamics, articulation, tone, phrasing.
Right.
These are all...
Now here's where, to me... Sorry, I'll let you play one in a second, but here's where, to me, this becomes so specific that it no longer is malleable, and that's what interests me. Like what you've just described there is so specific that if all the stars have to align in order for that to be a piece of vocabulary, it doesn't seem malleable to me.
But it's plastic enough to work in the context of what it is trying to do, right?
Right, got you. Okay, yeah.
It's like if you hear like Satchel from Steel Panther improvise.
Did you nearly say Pink Panther?
I nearly said Pink Panther. But if you hear Satchel from Steel Panther improvise, there is another good example of someone who has like the kind of all of the Eddie Van Halen tricks with the right tone and the right way of playing it.
Yeah,
and
enough.
It does come across. Now, it doesn't mean that when it comes to improvising, the guy just shrugs his shoulders and goes, well, I can't play that over this. You shoehorn it in a way and you kind of work out what works. And then you do that infilling of the gaps to make it fit. And I think you can do most of that in real time if you're really competent at that style.
Right. What was the lick you were going to play, BB?
It's just one that occurs at least 3, if not 4 times in Donnelly. Exact. So that occurs at least 3, if not 4 times in Donnelly.
Is it just me, or has he become more fluty?
We should definitely do a one style at a time, and we just go through what is the vocab in that style, and just have a little chat and exchange about it. Because I was thinking,
And then if someone doesn't have
Honeysuckle
anything,
Rose,
take a shot.
The Honeysuckle Rose thing, the variations on that, that phrase, where you could do like various variations on it. Exactly, right. So
I don't know if this is coming through actually recording. So
it sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, I don't.
I see what you mean.
It's only on the right channel, so.
No!
I'm hoping I might have to go back and overdub all this.
No! It'll be on the Zoom.
It's really clear on the Zoom, so you could.
But maybe we should do that. We should go have like a kind of. We should have some vocab hangs.
But yeah, man. But do you see what I mean about that? If that's something that Charlie played 3 times.
First name terms. Check him out. You weren't there, man.
It's weird if you call a jazz musician by their second name alone, it feels very like public school. And I feel.
Did you hear the licks that Parker played this morning?
Yeah, it's
Lingus.
Parker. Yeah, but I think it's you got to say just the first name, unless it's really generic like John.
No, that to me feels like something. Okay, and there's another one in. It's another train one in Giant Steps where I can't remember which one it is now, but there's another phrase that occurs, not just the obvious 1, 2, 3, 5 variations, but there's another couple that occur many times, and I have to think, well, that must be if those guys are sort of like spitting something out verbatim, that seems to me multiple times that would be a definition of something that is vocabulary to me, and that's the one that came. Or for example, in the other one that I did, so the now's the time.
You're going to do the... Yeah, I was going to mention that one.
That to me again feels like it's manipulating the kind of idea of the vocabulary. So, and this is all stuff that is, I guess for me, I've been kind of over since first lockdown, been digging into, and I, there's a massive long road ahead, but it feels to me like having an awareness, because now when I look at all this stuff, if I take that, I understand what that is doing. Whereas before, when I was at college and I had then got a Scooby about really what I was kind of doing, then and I was just taking it down. It was kind of meaningless to me.
So it's not just a coincidence that those are all in the same tune.
Different tunes.
Beebs out of the other end. So now you've just demonstrated a couple of pieces of vocab, if you like, Charlie Parker, Bebop, that stuff. Out of the other end, when it comes to improvisation and things like that, how have you found that you've been able to implement that, and what is the mindset there? Is it that kind of like you're gonna sort of jump onto a moving platform kind of thing, or?
Yeah, that's always been my thing with this. I don't get that.
Well, I don't know. Maybe you guys, when I ever get to play with you again, will be the arbiter of that. I think, Tom, you've mentioned maybe a couple of times, maybe in my defense, that you may have heard some things where things are improving, but I don't know. I feel it's a long journey, as I said. But I definitely feel that as I dig deeper and deeper into it and listen more and more in a healthy way. I think the worst thing that you can do, and I was absolutely guilty of this, is going for anthropology and and Donnelly and all those kind of things like out the gate, because it's almost too
a top shelf Parker.
Yeah, it's the real racy, dirty books.
It's not really accessible, is it? You get told go and listen, and then you're like, you just cannot possibly take any of it in. From the outside.
So I think that having the more...
It's plain accessible.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I'll stop now.
Denied.
Just on
we're scraping the barrel now, and
I'm sorry.
we're now 40 minutes over the length of time I said we'd be wrapped up by. Tom and I have to be up at 6 a.m. again.
As a request, could we potentially try and get someone like Josh Smith back to talk about sort of vocab? Because I've seen some of his stuff on YouTube recently, and the way he talks about some things, it's like, oh yeah, this is from these guys on that record, or I got this from this guy.
And I've learned a lot of Josh Smith stuff, and it doesn't necessarily come out in my playing, but I said out there like an East Ender. I don't know why, but it doesn't come out in my playing. Did it again, but I do know that there is stuff in his playing that is remarkably consistently used from thing to thing. Maybe he doesn't even, he probably does, but like there is just stuff, and that stuff could be, a nugget. And this is true of everyone's playing, as far as I know. And I think one of the things with, say like Tom, it's probably less harmonically and stylistically locatable. It's probably more tactilely understood. So we hung out the other day and we were talking about Pat Metheny, and there's this master's thesis by I can't remember his name now, It's just I know the guy. It's just gone. He's one of the lecturers at Canterbury Christchurch University, I think, and this master's thesis is it's something like pathways in the guitar playing of Pat Metheny,
All right.
where it's like a kind of cross comparison of where certain things are used. I'm sure you could do this with me. I'm sure you could do this with anyone, and I think that those things are more on the surface. With some people than others, and I think that surface layer is when it is very, very specifically stylistic.
On a very selfish level, I'd like to get somebody like Bruce Foreman or Bebop. I mean, Josh Smith, yes. I mean, obviously, he's an absolute monster of all language proportions. But I think a proper
narrow the field even more.
A proper bopper, who's like has that. For my own selfish reasons, I'd love to.
Because you're an improper bopper.
Oh,
Improper bopper.
BB's improper bopper Bible.
Exactly. Well, no, it's the opposite of that.
I feel like
isn't
that's
it?
a vocal warm up, like on Anchorman. David Beebe's improper bopper Bible.
Oh, well done.
I went for it and I got it. It was like that 3-pointer Obama shot the other day. I felt like that.
well, that's the safe word for this week. If anybody, if you've made it this far,
What's the safe word?
to BB's improper. Oh, I can't even do it.
See, that's bad news, isn't it? 'Cause
BB's
you can't even
improper
say the
Bopper
safe
Bible.
word.
Is that right?
Okay. So here's the safe word. Dan's safe word of the week is
BB's improper bopper Bible.
whoever puts that first into one of our social media comments gets a free sticker.
You lucky things.
Hey, someone got a t-shirt last week. I'm not going to do 2 t-shirts 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, we haven't even got t-shirts yet. So,
Shall we?
I'm just going to go and post it in the chat and get a sticker, though.
You don't count.
I hear that all the time.
yeah, it's all muscle memory.
It's let's wind this down because we're now 45 minutes over the time when I said this would all be finished.
Typical, like 4 of us together again.
It's good
Catching
though.
up.
This was a proper good one. Let's wind it down. Thank you everybody for listening. Hope that was interesting and not too nerdy. What am I talking about? You love the nerdy.
We love you plenty.
Plenty. So all that remains is to do the outro housekeeping and say thanks to all our lovely, wonderful patron supporters making the show happen. Our executive producers are Alan Dela Cruz, Andy French, Dave Cookson, David Kisselbauer, Elliot DeVries, James Went, Jerry Popek, Jonathan Murrell, Mark Lee, Martin Mason, Matt Burtwhistle, Maxime Kaczynski, Michael Norris, Michael Smith, Mike Petty, Nick Gauntlet, Nikon, Acast, Norman Taylor, Paskin794, Pat De Jong, Robert S. Leher, Sam Oxley, Sam Whiting, Tim Bennett, Tim Daly, Ulf Schwark, Volkan Bakurdan, and Zach Loss. Thank you guys so much for supporting us. And as I say, all the patrons at all levels at the extra minutes and the executive producer plus levels. Stay tuned on Patreon for the information about the Discord. We're going to record and do potential live listen episode next week on Discord. Until next time. Thanks for guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.